Originally it was a department store. It also housed the post office. It was the Partridge clothing about 20 years ago, and now it's the Crow building. On top of that building, they also had a civil defense department during World War II where they had a lookout. Thankfully nothing changed. Okay, now we're just going to go down. We're going to find some shade, and we have a little history to talk about.
So, it could have been a fourth bedroom. Instead of a big master bedroom.
Yes, I have done. The earliest land purchase by the European settlers was Peter Sonmas, and he bought 3,000 acres from the Indians. In 1731, Hendrik van der Leener bought a large tract, and in 1935 he sold 500 acres, or 1/3 of today's Park Ridge, to Frederick Wortendijk, and it was settled by the Jersey Dutch. John Ackerson and son Garrett in turn bought some Wortendijk property, and they harnessed the power of the Pascack Brook. And they built and operated a cider distillery and wool mill there. And when we go up, we'll end up with our walk around the mill pond, and we'll point out where he had his woolen mill and his home and the training post. But he was the one that dammed the brook to form Mill Pond. Mill Pond used to be down more towards the municipal field, and then the course was changed. During the American Revolutionary War, our valley was neither British or American because it was Dutch. So unfortunately, this neutrality subjected the valley residents from raids on both sides, and that's why we have so many different battlegrounds in the area. In 1808, Abraham Campbell, along with his sons John, James, David, and Abraham Jr., bought Wortendijk property and took over the Ackerson Woolen Mill, which was along Mill Road, and they secretly converted the factory to the production of wampum, the only item that Native Americans would accept as currency. They did take over the woolen mill up on Mill Pond, and that burned. So in this area back here along the brook was their second wampum factory. Wampum was made from the conch shells and the clam shells. They got them along the East Coast, and they also got them from the ships that they used as ballast. The white wampum was probably worth, I think, 6 beads that they made was worth an English penny, and the black ones, which were more rare, were about 3 were worth, I guess an English penny would buy 3 of them. They got them from, on the clamshell, they got them from that dark lip on the clamshell, the black beads, and the white ones they got from inside the shell. When the settlers first arrived, wampum was a thriving business along the whole East Coast. And even though the Americans by 1830 had English currency and coins, it was very scarce to get. So the only recourse that the settlers had was to deal in wampum. The Indians used it as jewelry. They made belts out of it, headgear, and collars, and they also used it in the ceremony. The groom would give it to the bride's family. They also would use it as a peace offering to relatives of a murder victim, and also they also would give it to another group of Indians as a peace symbol. Even as late as the 1700s, it was used for payment on the ferry ride from Manhattan Island to Brooklyn. But as the Indians migrated further west, the European need for wampum decreased. And that was probably around 1899. But before that, Bergen County became the key area of colonial wampum making. Between Partridge and Goffle, which was later known as Hawthorne, they were the biggest wampum makers. It even became a cottage industry between the settlers' wives and the Indians. And John Jacob Astor at the time, one of the leading fur traders and eventually coat makers, would buy wampum from the Campbells and then sell it in the city. It was the only way that he could acquire pelts and furs from some of the Indians. And he also used it to deal with the West Indians. Around the middle of the 1800s, John Campbell, he invented the first wampum machine. By then they made it by hand. And he devised a way with water power to drill out the conch shells. And he also made 6-inch pipes, which the Indians really used in all their jewelry, and they were hard to find, so hard to make. So with the machine, it was easier to make. The wampum machine, there was only 2 at that time. One remains, and it remains, at this point, it's at the Pascack Historical Society. Hopefully the building will be open when we get up there and you can see it. The Smithsonian Institute has made numerous offers over the years. They would love to have it, and we really would like to try to find some way to fireproof the building or sprinkle the building, but it's hard because you have a lot of paper artifacts there, so to have a sprinkler in there could be dangerous to the other historical items that we have there. Now, okay, we're going to walk up Sulak. We're going to go over down to the Dyke Barn. We're also going to talk about the Dyke Barn and see the church, the cemetery, etc. Even as late as I guess the 1960s, when I was a kid, we used to dig for wampum along here. I found a lot of shells. My girlfriends found some wampum. The only thing I found was a good case of poison ivy. but I'm sure that there's still a lot underneath all that dirt. Here. Are you enjoying this still? I think there's a lot back there still, right? Yeah. That hill is Across the street we have Frederick Wortendyke's home, which was built around 1750 from native sandstone. We have quite a few of these homes in our town. We have 2 of them on Rivervale Road, which was the main road over to Pan, New York, before Park Avenue was built. And they were all made of the native sandstone, and they've held up pretty well. He also built the barn here, the Wortendyke Barn. It's the last surviving Dutch colonial barn in Bergen County. The Dutch barns were distinguished by the fact that they were almost always wider than deep. The gable ends boast wide wagon doors through which the farmers could drive with a full wagon of hay, with smaller entrance doors for man or animals placed at the farmer's convenience. The massive interior anchor beams stretch from column to column across the central aisle and are the most conspicuous evidence of solid Dutch architecture and workmanship. Such huge timbers placed these barns in a unique class. Upon them they had saplings that rested, which could support a vast amount of hay in the huge lofts, which lie under the broad sloping roof. Dutch barns are most frequently divided into 3 aisles. They had stalls for livestock, which were placed along the side and aisles tucked under the eaves, and the animals faced inward. The Wortendyke barn has been on this site for approximately 2 centuries. It's been maintained by the subsequent owners, and the Bergen County Board of Chosen Freeholders, with aid and assistance by the Historic Sites Advisory Board and the Pascack Historical Society, have ensured its preservation. I I was hoping it was going to be open, but I don't know if you've noticed it's been recently restored in the last few months, and they still have some work on the inside. But if you get a chance when they're open, you should come in and look in the inside. It's really interesting. They have antique farm implements inside. Does anyone have any questions yet? We were hoping to have a barn dance here in the fall, and we have to work it out. That should be fun. Square dance, old-fashioned square dance. Okay, now we're going to go back to the cemetery, and then we'll talk about the church and the cemetery, the two cemeteries.
Hello, Miss. How are you?
Aqua and purple baseball hat. Any of the kids with a baseball hat? Cemetery. We're just going to talk about Our Lady of Mercy Church. I don't know if anyone here remembers, but the original was St. Mary's Church, and it was on Hawthorne Avenue. It was established in 1902. By 1951, they needed more room, and they bought part of the Gould residence, which is the convent, the stone convent that's still standing. Proudman, who was one of our Girl Scout leaders who died a few years ago, that was her dad, George C. Bennett. He did a lot of the masonry on many of our buildings, the high school, and the bridges, and he did a lot of the stonework on the house also. The church bought 15 acres that we're standing on now from the Wharton-Dykes in 1855. They did have a house that was standing, and they did have some grave plots that are here that were here when they did buy the property. The grave site in back of you, surrounded by the metal fencing, it's a free African-American grave plot, and there were soldiers that fought with the Connecticut Regiment during the Civil War. And below that, down on the hill, it's a word of mouth. We're not really positive about this, but supposedly it's an Indian burial ground. Carl Weiss is the local cemetery historian from the Dutch Reformed Church, and Pat and I had gone on the tour last week, so thank God. Now I know some history of it. And he's worked with the Ramapo College and various other organizations to try to get some more history on these two cemeteries. He's also taken a cemetery restoration class. He plans to retire this year and devote full time to restoring many of the gravestones that have fallen, and there's a lot of rough stones and other stones that are underneath the ground, so they're hoping to do a full restoration within, it'll take a while, but in the next 10 years or so. The pastor's house, the yellow house there, was built in 1940, and the pastor, Reverend Jansen, lives there now. One of our first pastors, the first full-time pastor was a Mr. Demarest in 1856. He came home one day and he found his wife and 9 children murdered in the house here. They never found the murderer. They never had any clues or anything like that. From 1913 to 1914, Mayor Siebert was the pastor here. I guess after that, of the original 15 acres, the water company and the Park Ridge utility bought 7.9 acres and left 3.7 acres as cemetery. In turn, during the 80s, the town donated some of the property for the handicapped housing with the stipulation that any properties given then were to be returned for cemetery use in October 2059. So I don't think we'll have to deal with that then. Your headstones that are here in the graveyard are the white limestone, we have the brown sandstone, and we have the granite. If you look around, you'll see a lot of the headstones with the names of prominent Pascack Valley residents, and also a lot of the street names you'll see on a lot of the headstones. They still have plots here. Up until a few years ago, the plots were still being sold, but now they're only open to church members. We just had May Gould, who was our oldest resident in town. I think she was 100 or 101. She died last year. She was buried here, and we did have somebody buried here a few months ago. So, it's still an active cemetery. That was good. In the northeast corner, in that corner, the Wharton-Dyke family plot is also over there. And some of the headstones, the earliest they can find is 1745. And on the headstones, it's written in Jersey Dutch, which was a combination of Dutch, English, and some German. Sally Wharton Dyke was buried in 1844, and her headstone is in the cemetery here. They also bought, when the Wharton Dykes owned the property, they also rented to tenant farmers. And a lot of the rough stones, you'll notice they're just like a little round stone in the ground. They had a headstone and a footstone on the graves. A lot of those were from the tenant farmers. So if you want to spend a few minutes going to the cemetery, you know, you're welcome, and then we'll go on.
Well, at least they said there's some free blacks. They said.
What's that?
Free blacks.
You can see it's a gully in there.
Yeah.
That's the what's going on. What do you mean? Sorry, fucking oil and all that. I don't think I can jump.
You hear me? The first cemetery, the large headstone when we passed the cemetery was near. He lived in the greenhouse, which was just knocked down a few years ago over where they're building that new house now. He was our first doctor in town, and he was also the first mayor. Now this cemetery was built along with the church. The Pascack Dutch Reformed Church was named Pascack. The Indians called this valley Pascack, and it meant running water, or the place where the waters divide, which was the Hackensack River and the Pascack Brook. This was built in 1812. As you can see, the gravestones here are much older. They added on to the back of the church, and they did disrupt some graves. What they had to do was contact all the relatives of the families, and they put them in one burial plot in the corner here, and there's a memorial there. And they also added on Fellowship Hall, which is down here, in 1959. And Carl Weiss, who I told you before is the historian, they do have plans to x-ray the pavement and also some of the burial grounds in the other cemetery to see what's under there. We're still looking for the original cemetery map. They can't find it anywhere, and most likely it's probably in somebody's attic, or hopefully it wasn't thrown out. So they do have a lot of the history missing because they don't have the original map and history of the people that are buried here. In 1808, the first Partridge High School was Partridge School, not the high school, was built here even before the church. The residents felt very strongly about education. It was their pride and joy. Up until 1989, there was a plaque in the corner over there, and on it it said, "On this site in 1808, the neighbors built their first schoolhouse, the oldest school in North Bergen County." The Pascack Historical Society has a picture of the marker, and we hope to replace it soon. While we're talking about the school, I think 3 or 4 more schools followed in the general area, both across the street and over at the corner here. In 1909, the first high school was built. It served 60 students from 7 towns. It burned in 1920. They're not sure. They sort of feel it was arson, but they've never proved it. All the records were burned along with it, so they lost all the records from any of the history of the school system. But by 1921, the residents got together and built the school that's situated there now. So if you'd like to go around and look at some of these grave sites. We do have an interesting one over in the northeast corner. There's an iron gate surrounding it, and it's an Asian Indian burial plot. Go ahead.
What is that? What is the origin of the Demarest name? It's Dutch?
Across the street, starting with, I think this house and up, is about 6 or 7 homes, and it's called Riley's Ridge. They were built by Mr. Mittag, who owned Mittag and Bulgers downtown, in 1898. He made them all alike, and lore has it that one of his workers, Mr. Riley, populated these houses with his family and their families. Now this is a little story on the side. These houses were so alike that years ago, I guess one of the husbands came home a little inebriated and went in the wrong home and went upstairs and went to bed with his neighbor's wife and realized he was in the wrong home. But that's
How did
really
you
cool.
realize?
I wasn't there. He's missing. And then everybody's familiar with Rock Cottage. It's a stone home located on Ridge Avenue right before the American Legion on the corner of 2nd. That was Francis Wheaton's home. We had an artist colony, and it extended from the middle of Ridge Avenue till about Spring Valley Road, and it was populated by artists. Francis Wheaton was a well-known American scenery painter, and he was also involved in the politics in the beginning of Park Ridge. Across the street, around 1900, Huntsman T. Manson came to town. Manson formed a cult. He showed up with flowing robes, long hair, and a long beard. He held meetings that attracted as many as 1,000 people from all over New Jersey and New York. He preached communal living, vegetarianism, health through religion, and God's wrath at the sins of the day. He preached universal love, but town residents felt Manson showed more affection for the local young girls than mankind in general. Young ladies became his ardent followers. They ripped their ruffles from their dresses and their flowers from their hats. The meetings were bedlam, and the women were yelling, the men were climbing buildings. It was quite a shock to a peaceful community at that time. Some local folks took things into their own hands, led by James Leach. And one night they dragged Manson from his house, cut his hair and beard, and put him on a train back to New York City. This is in 1900. Now, James Leach, because he was the leader, was eventually prosecuted and heavily fined for this misdemeanor, but he was more relieved that the nightmare was over. But eventually Manson reappeared, but located his gathering place on Wearmouth Road, Mookhoff Lake, Mary and John Storm's farm. He persuaded their children to put their parents in one of the outbuildings and took over the farm. For 5 years, they farmed the land and they sold their produce, but when Mary Storms died, the relatives kicked the followers out, and they had nowhere to go, and the group disbanded. So it's funny how the name Manson keeps coming up in history. Okay. All right, as everyone knows, this is the Pacifica historical building. It was the original Congregational Church. It was originally called Leach's Chapel. It started out as a Sunday school. It first started out in 1873. A group of concerned women in the neighborhood gathered the needy children who had been left homeless and their parents after a disastrous fire in the works that we'll talk about that were on Mill Road. And then they erected a building here and they started a Sunday school. It was also the town's first library. In 1950-51, the new building, the new Congregational Church, which is down the street, was erected. And then the Pascack Historical Society took over this building. So Wilma Uter is the moderator in there, and everyone can go in. The Wampum machine is in here, and we'll take a quick 5 minutes inside. Was anybody behind you? Huh?
A couple last out of the museums, I guess.
Did everyone see the Ackerson house, the old sandstone house on the corner of Pascack and Mill? Okay, that was the Ackerson house. If you go down Pascack, that way, north. Go down north. On the right side is an old Victorian farmhouse. It's a white one up on the hill. And that's the Smith house. This is the William Smith house. Where's Penny when I need her? What was it originally? Huh? It was built between 1861 and 1876, and it's one of the finest detailed Queen Anne style residences built in Park Ridge. William B. Smith came here. He wanted to start the New Jersey model silk farm in Colony. In 1882. 83.
Weren't sure there, huh?
The real historian is here now, so she's gonna know. What he did was he imported silkworms. He planted mulberry trees, and he tried to make a silk farm out of it. But he found out that the half-mile of silk on each cocoon to undo by hand took a lot more time, and the business floundered. So being the tycoon that he was, he decided to divide his land into building lots. And he had his real estate business, Smith Real Estate Business, in Depot Square. And any commuters coming out from the city, he had an office in the city, and he gave out train tickets, and when the people arrived at the depot in Park Ridge, he met them there, would take them up on horse and carriage and buggy, and he'd bring them up to his land and sell them lots. So that's probably when we really started populating the town, other than our first settlers. Now, as we said before, Ackerson had bought some land from the Whartondikes. And in 1697, across the street from his home on the corner of Mill and Pascack, the block house was built. It was a two-story block building. Even though the Indians were friendly, he still felt that he might need that second floor just in case they became a little bit unfriendly. So it was in the form of a block house, and that's why they called it that. It was the first commercial building in Pascack Valley. In 1723, another Ackerson, Ome Ackerson, occupied the upper floor, and he ran a trading post on the main floor. So that's where the original trading post. A few years back, it's in the Historical Society, I don't know if anybody saw it, they uncovered a stone, it said 77 GA, Garrett Ackerson. And the people that live there now have said that they've unearthed some pretty old stones. They feel that they still have the foundation of a blockhouse in front of their home. They were going to try to unearth some more. I don't know if the foundation would still be there or not. In 1904, right here is the pump house that was built.
Yeah, so you. Look, see? Stuart.
By 1911, we had the first electricity produced by the water wheel that's on the side of the building. We still have the main mechanisms inside, and at this point, we have, the DEP has feels that our dams are unsafe. It's going to cost about $400,000 to fix them, both the east dam and the east dam over there. What we're trying to do is acquire some historical grant money, and under the assumption of restoring this building back. There's a man in Cold Springs that knows all about the mechanisms of the pump, of the wheel, and he's going to help us restore it, and then we can eventually open it up to the public and hopefully repair our dams at the same time. We also said before that Ackerson had originally dammed this brook to form the pond. The first electricity that was produced supplied 26 residents and Depot Square. And at one point, one of our mayors at the time, his daughter was getting married, so he rerouted the electric so that his daughter would have electricity at her wedding, and the 26 residents had none. The power. I think Partridge now is out of the whole state of New Jersey there's only 3 towns that have their own utility system. And that's a whole nother history and a whole nother story. Any questions? Anything else, Penny?
So, except that we were the first town around in Bergen County, I believe, to light our streets with our own electricity.
Yeah, we did. Penny just said we were the first town in the valley to light our streets with electricity. And we also, we're going to point out, along Mill here, when he did dam the brook up for power, Ackerson, there was a woolen mill, there was a bobbin factory, a spool factory, which they provided spools and bobbins to New York City and Patterson for their woolen mills. We also had, we're gonna eventually walk down here and walk over to the Dean house over there, the older home that's up there. There was a pipe factory there, and there was a bookbinding place, and there's a sorted industry over there now. Dr. Dean owned the house at one time, and he brought children from the inner cities, Patterson and Newark at the time, and he brought them out. It was called the Doctor's Retreat, and he brought them out for a summer of summer fun and swimming. And
What was the year the dam broke? You have that down?
the dam broke in 1947.
I don't remember exactly the year.
That's right. This dam broke in 1947. It flooded all the way down to the football field. Probably early 40s.
Playing?
43 maybe. Somewhere around there, 43, early 40s. Yeah. Okay. Just to point out, a lot of our sandstone homes and national historic sites, the people that own them, in order to renovate or make improvements, they have to go to a special board to keep with the age structure, etc. So you can own the home, but it's really tough to improve it. They have their own rules and regulations to keep.
And the pipe comes out way down there, way down. Big pipe, it's big bigger than that. It's like a figure, see that?
Okay, this is the William Dean Estate. It was built in 1909. It's an outstanding example of an early English country house mansion. On the grounds are various industries that have been here along the way. They had the Briarwood Pipe Company. It burned once, they built it, and it burned again. They never rebuilt it, but then they put the building up that's here. They've had a bookbinding, a printing factory, and now it's I think they have a child center here. I think it's for sale. It sounds like that they're going to sell it, but we're hoping that they'll at least keep the house here. Years ago, when it was sold about 20-something years ago, the town considered using it for their municipal building. Sorry we didn't.
Yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and it's been kept in beautiful shape.
These are private owners that are going to sell it?
It's in a corporation between the house and the, but it's privately owned like a corporation.
So it's like office buildings inside?
Yeah, there's some office buildings. I don't think there are now. There was. John Felgraf had his architectural, before he moved over to Kinderkamak, he was in one of the homes over there. Partridge Country Club. Someone pointed out also that Dean's was an apron factory and a shirt factory also at one time. And this area over here where the apartments are was the original St. Mary's Catholic Church. And then back here we had a grotto with the statue of the Virgin Mary. I was just telling some of the people that Phil DeBella tried to move it a few years ago to move it over to the church, but it crumbled. Also on Hawthorne Avenue, down about 5 houses or so, the house has burned since then, but it was the first firehouse. It was the Hawthorne Avenue firehouse and started in 1898. I regretted to point out the bell in the tower of the Dutch Reformed Church. That was our first fire alarm system. So whenever there was a fire, then someone would run up and ring the bell. Just a little on the fire department. 50 men formed the company. In 1900 they had a heated argument. Half left and formed the Century Hook and Ladder on Colony Avenue, which still stands. It's between 5th Street and the Park Ridge Pool. On the same side of the street as the pool. It's a stone house, and they have, you can see the arches over the windows where the engines would be. Out of all our firehouses, the only one not standing is the Hawthorne Avenue firehouse. They also had a firehouse over where the first ambulance building was, next to auto parts. I think there's a video place there now. But in 1938, the ambulance corps started, and they housed their ambulances over in that house. What else did they have? Then, of course, in 1924, when the municipal building was built, they combined the 3 separate departments into the one department. Talking about the ambulance corps, at the time, they only had Hackensack Hospital, and they didn't have an ambulance corps. They used to put them on the train and send them right down to Hackensack on the train. They also had Bergham Pines, and they had a Hackensack ambulance company, but they didn't use them that much. But the ambulance corps was started by the fire department, and it included members of the fire department, police. You know, back when we were a small town, mostly everybody was involved in something, and either when the fire bell or the ambulance was needed, everybody dropped their work at the time and ran. When we go down the street, the commuter lot down here on the right, that was originally the Partridge Academy. And students from all over the world came. It didn't last very long. I don't have the dates right here available. Eventually it was bought by someone, and it was called the Park Ridge Hotel, and it was there until 1958 till it burned. And the Pascack Inn. It was a big gathering place for everyone. Weddings, yes. It was very popular. This was at the commuter lot that we're going to pay us up here on the corner, on the left. And as you can see, this is maybe a third of the history of the town. There's just so much. And even though we were only incorporated 100 years ago, we've been settled for a few hundred years. And we're just going to stop then down at Depot Square, talk a little bit about Depot Square, and we'll be done. This was the hub of Partridge. The train originally was not going to run through the town, and they lobbied, and the townspeople built the station in 1871. I'm checking with Penny.
Well, actually, originally the railroad was going to run up there about even with 2nd Street.
Even with 2nd Street, the railroad was going to go.
About donated land. The farmers objected because they were afraid of fires. Lawville donated land here, and the railroad put the tracks through here,
Okay,
but the train was running in
Right.
1871. It just wasn't
oh, okay.
express didn't stop
Right.
here.
The train was running, but we didn't have a stop here. They wanted to put it further up. Lawville and the other farmers objected, so they donated the property down here, and it was built in 1871. Georgia and Penny Pete were instrumental in restoring it in 1981, and since then we've been using it for organizations, meetings, etc. We had a department store here. We had William B. Smith's real estate here. When I was little in the 50s, the A&P was here, B&M Meat Market, Goodman's, Five and Dime store. And everybody, I think maybe is still familiar with Midtag and Bulger, which was across the street. That's probably how they arrived at the name, as the motto in industry, by industry we flourish. It brought a lot of people to the town, it provided jobs, and they also had their first mayor and council meeting there when it was still there. When they sold, the town acquired part of the property, was donated to build the memorial that's over there now. And the gazebo, that's the DeBorn gazebo. There's an older home on the end of Riverville Road, not one of the Fieldstones. It's on the Homestead hike. When the property was sold, it was subdivided with 3 extra lots about 2 years ago. And it was one of the last surviving carriage houses, but that was torn down, so we asked if we could have the gazebo, and we restored it, and we put it up in honor of Phil Lockett, one of our councilmen that died a few years ago. So all in all, the area, if you get a chance, there's some pictures of Borough Hall. The layout of the depot has changed over the years, but it still looks great. I'd really like to thank everyone for coming. I hope that you learned a little bit of history. I love history, and I hope we can get a lot of people interested in it. It's good to continue it and to pass it on to the younger residents in town. Westwood has a Heritage Society, and they've done very well with theirs, and hopefully I would love to start one next year with people that are interested in preserving historic sites, raising money to preserve, even just to help out, like we passed the cemetery that needs a lot of work. So there's a lot of things that we could do, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. We'll see you hopefully at the Centennial Parade Picnic on the 11th. And enjoy the rest of the activities. And we have refreshments. Is anybody thirsty?
Yes!